Have you ever done the math on how many hours you actually work and felt like the number should translate into a much better financial situation than you have? Not just the 40 hours on paper. The real numbers. The emails you answer after dinner. The calls you take on weekends. The lunch breaks that aren't really lunch breaks. The commute where you're mentally still at work. The prep you do at home the night before a big meeting. The extra hours during crunch periods that nobody tracks but everyone expects. Add all of that up honestly, and a lot of people are working 50, 55, sometimes 60 hours a week, giving an enormous portion of their waking life to their job. And then looking at their bank account and their savings and their retirement balance and thinking, this doesn't add up. I'm working this hard and this is what I have to show for it. And the really unsettling part is that it's not just you. This is one of the most widespread and least discussed financial realities in America right now. People are working more than they ever have. More hours, more jobs, more side hustles, more gigs. And a growing number of them are falling further behind financially despite all of it. Welcome to my channel, and today we are going to break down exactly why that's happening. Every mechanism, every system, every structural reason why working harder is not translating into financial progress for a huge portion of the American workforce. Because once you understand why it's happening, you can stop blaming yourself for it and start making decisions that actually account for the reality you're in. Hit subscribe if you want to keep seeing the financial systems that affect all of us explained clearly. Let's get into it. Let's start with the actual data, because the numbers tell a story that almost nobody is presenting clearly and completely. Americans work more hours per year than workers in almost every other wealthy developed nation. The average American works approximately 1,800 hours per year. Compare that to Germany at around 1,350 hours. France at about 1,400. The United Kingdom at roughly 1,530. Japan, famously known for its intense work culture, at about 1,600. Americans are outworking all of them by a significant margin. And it's not just the hours. It's the intensity. It's the fact that Americans take less vacation than workers in any other developed country. The United States is the only wealthy nation on Earth with no federal mandate for paid vacation time. 0. Every other developed economy guarantees workers paid time off. The U.S. leaves it entirely to employer discretion. And the average American worker uses only about half of whatever paid vacation they do receive, because the culture makes taking time off feel like a career risk. Now here's where the data gets genuinely disturbing. Worker productivity in the United States has increased dramatically over the last several decades. Since 1979, productivity, meaning the economic output generated per hour of work, has grown by roughly 60 to 70%. Workers today produce significantly more value per hour than workers did 40 years ago. Compensation, meaning wages and benefits adjusted for inflation, has grown by about 17% over the same period. Let that gap sink in. Productivity up 60 to 70%. Compensation up 17%. Someone captured the difference between those two numbers. And it wasn't the workers. This is the core of what's happening. Americans are working more hours than almost anyone in the developed world, producing more value per hour than ever before in history, and keeping less of what they produce than at any point in the last 50 years. That's not a personal failing. That's a structural reality. And it has very specific causes that are worth understanding completely. So if productivity went up 60% and wages only went up 17%, where did the other 43% go? Because it didn't disappear. It went somewhere. And understanding where it went is essential to understanding why working harder isn't fixing the problem. The answer is that the gains from productivity growth went almost entirely to capital, meaning to business owners, shareholders, and the people at the very top of the income distribution, rather than to workers. This shift didn't happen randomly. It happened through a very specific set of policy decisions, economic changes, and power dynamics that accumulated over roughly 50 years. Start with the decline of labor unions. In 1954, About 35% of American workers were represented by unions. Today, that number is around 10% and falling. Unions exist to give workers collective bargaining power, the ability to negotiate wages, benefits, and working conditions as a group rather than as individuals. When union membership was high, workers had real leverage. When it declined, workers lost the primary mechanism through which they captured a fair share of productivity gains. The decline wasn't accidental. It was the result of deliberate policy choices, legal changes, and corporate strategies specifically designed to reduce union power. And the correlation between declining union membership and declining worker share of productivity gains is not subtle. The lines move together almost perfectly. As unions weakened, workers captured less. As capital strengthened, capital captured more. Then there's the shift from defined benefit pensions to defined contribution retirement plans. Your parents' generation, if they worked for a major employer, likely had a pension. A guaranteed monthly income in retirement regardless of market performance. That pension was a form of deferred compensation, part of the total value their work produced that was set aside for their future. Today, most workers have 401k instead, which shifts the investment risk entirely onto the worker. If the market goes up, great. If it goes down, your problems. The employer's obligation went from guaranteeing a retirement to simply offering a vehicle for you to save your own money in. That's a fundamental shift in who bears the financial risk of the future, and it happened so gradually that most people barely noticed. Here's the other half of the equation that makes the productivity wage gap so devastating in practice. It's not just that wages haven't kept up with productivity. It's that the cost of the things that actually matter, the things that determine quality of life and financial security, has gone up dramatically faster than both wages and general inflation. Think about the major expense categories that define financial well-being: housing, healthcare, education, childcare, transportation. Housing costs in most American markets have increased by 200 to 400% over the last 30 years, adjusted for inflation. Healthcare costs have risen roughly 250% in real terms over the same period. College tuition at four-year institutions has increased by about 180% above inflation since 1980. Childcare costs have roughly doubled as a share of family income over the last 25 years. These aren't luxury categories. These are the foundational expenses of a stable middle-class life: a house, medical care, education for your kids, someone to watch your children while you work. These are not optional. You cannot opt out of them. And their costs have risen dramatically faster than wages for decades. This is why the standard advice, work harder, spend less, save more, doesn't work for a growing portion of the population. The math has broken down at the structural level. A two-income household today, both partners working full-time, often has less financial breathing room than a single-income household did in 1970. Not because people are less disciplined. Because the cost of the essential things has grown faster than the income available to pay for them. And this creates a specific and brutal trap. To afford the basics, housing, healthcare, education, people have to work more. More hours, more jobs, more side hustles. But working more doesn't increase wages proportionally, because wages are determined by labor market dynamics, not by individual effort. So you work more. You produce more. And the gap between what you produce and what you keep stays the same or gets wider. The trap tightens the harder you run. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice, because the second job economy is one of the most significant and underreported economic developments of the last decade. The number of Americans holding multiple jobs has climbed steadily. About 8 million Americans currently work more than one job simultaneously. That's roughly 5% of the workforce. But that number significantly undercounts the reality because it doesn't include the gig economy, people driving for rideshare, delivering food, freelancing, selling things online, which operates outside traditional employment classifications. When you include gig work, the picture changes dramatically. Studies estimate that 36% of American workers participate in the gig economy in some form. More than a third of the workforce doing something on the side to make ends meet or get ahead. And here's what that actually looks like for real people. Let me tell you about someone we'll call Marcus. He's 38. He works full-time in IT support, making $58,000 a year. On paper, that sounds livable. But Marcus lives in a mid-sized city where his rent is $1,800 a month. He has a car payment, student loans, and a kid in daycare that costs $1,400 a month, which is actually below average for his area. Marcus does the math on his take-home after taxes and his fixed expenses, and he has almost nothing left. So Marcus drives for a rideshare company 3 nights a week and on Saturday mornings. He clears about $600 to $800 a month from it after expenses. That money goes directly to keeping the family's head above water. Marcus is working approximately 55 to 60 hours a week total. He hasn't had a real day off in 4 months. He's exhausted. His relationship is strained from the constant absence. His health has slipped because he's not sleeping enough or exercising. And his financial position, despite all of this, is not improving meaningfully. He's surviving. He's not building anything. There are millions of Marcuses. The second job isn't getting people ahead. It's keeping them from falling behind. And there's an enormous difference between those two things. Here's a concept that most people have never heard of, but that explains a huge amount about why working harder isn't working. It's called the productivity paradox at the worker level. The basic idea is this. When individual workers work more hours, then the economy's total productivity goes up. More output gets produced. More value gets created. But because wages are determined by the overall labor market, by supply and demand for labor, by the balance of power between workers and employers, individual workers don't capture the gains from their own additional effort. Think about it this way. If you work 20% more hours this year, your employer gets 20% more output from you at the same cost. That's great for your employer. But your wage doesn't automatically go up 20% because you worked harder. Your wage goes up based on what other employers would pay for someone with your skills and experience. And if there are enough workers available with similar skills, your wage doesn't move much regardless of how hard you work individually. This is the fundamental mismatch that makes the work harder to get ahead advice seems pointless. Individual effort is real, and it matters for career advancement in specific contexts. But it doesn't fix a structural wage problem. You cannot personally work your way out of a system where the gains from productivity growth are flowing to capital rather than labor. Working twice as hard doesn't double your wages, when wages aren't set by your individual output. And the gig economy makes this worse, not better. The gig economy is specifically structured so that workers bear all of the risk, no guaranteed income, no benefits, no job security, while the platform captures significant value from every transaction. You drive the car, take the risk, absorb the wear and tear, and get paid a rate that the platform sets. The platform takes its cut from every ride. Uber and Lyft didn't get to billion-dollar valuations by sharing the gains generously with their drivers. There's a dimension of this that doesn't get discussed enough in financial terms. And that's what economists call time poverty. Time poverty is the condition of having insufficient time for rest, recovery, relationships, and the activities that make life meaningful, because all available time is consumed by work and work-related obligations. And time poverty has direct financial consequences that create a vicious cycle. When you're working 55 or 60 hours a week, you don't have time to cook. So you spend more on food, delivery, takeout, convenience items than you would if you had time to shop and cook properly. You don't have time to comparison shop or research purchases carefully. You don't have time to maintain things properly so they last longer. You don't have time to take care of your health proactively, so small health issues become expensive large ones. Time poverty makes everything more expensive. And that expense gets absorbed by working more, which creates more time poverty, which creates more expense. The cycle feeds itself. There's also the human cost that eventually becomes a financial cost. Chronic overwork damages health, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, immune dysfunction, mental health disorders. Healthcare costs money. Chronic stress damages relationships. Divorce is one of the most financially devastating events that can happen to a household. Exhaustion impairs judgment. Tired, stressed people make worse financial decisions than rested, clear-headed ones. The system that extracts maximum labor from workers while minimizing their compensation is also, not coincidentally, a system that leaves workers with less time and energy to manage their finances carefully, advocate for better conditions, or build the kind of social and political capital that might change the dynamics. So here's the full picture. Americans are working more than almost anyone in the developed world, producing more value per hour than ever in history, and keeping less of what they produce than at any point in the last 50 years. The productivity gains went to capital, not labor. Union power declined, and workers lost their primary negotiating tool. Pensions got replaced with 401k, shifting all retirement risk onto workers. The cost of housing, healthcare, education, and childcare exploded while wages crawled. The second job economy emerged not as opportunity, but as survival mechanism. Time poverty made everything more expensive and left workers less equipped to fight back. None of this is your fault. And understanding that it isn't your fault is actually important, not as an excuse, but as an accurate diagnosis. Because if you misdiagnose the problem, you apply the wrong solution. If you think you're falling behind because you're not working hard enough, the answer is to work more. But if the system is extracting more from your work than it returns, working more just extracts more value from you without solving the underlying math. So what do you actually do? First, stop measuring your financial health by hours worked and start measuring it by net worth trajectory. The goal isn't to work more. The goal is to build assets that generate returns independent of your labor. Every dollar invested is a dollar working for you instead of you working for it. Second, understand your labor market value clearly and ruthlessly. The primary lever most workers actually have is the ability to move between employers. Wage growth from job switching has consistently outpaced wage growth from staying at the same job. Loyalty to an employer that isn't matching your market value is a financial decision. And it's usually the wrong one. Third, protect your time as fiercely as you protect your money. Time poverty is expensive. Every hour you reclaim from unnecessary work is an hour that can go toward cooking instead of delivery, health maintenance instead of healthcare bills, financial planning instead of financial chaos. And fourth, don't let the system gaslight you. The narrative that you just need to work harder, hustle more, grind longer, that narrative benefits the people capturing the gains from your productivity. It keeps you focused on your own effort level instead of the structural reality that your effort level was never really the problem. You are not behind because you aren't working hard enough. You are behind because you are working in a system that was deliberately designed to keep the gains moving upward. Understanding that clearly is the first step toward making decisions that account for reality rather than the mythology of meritocracy. Drop a like if this explains something you've been living but couldn't name. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing the real mechanics behind the financial systems shaping your life.